In the world of military elite forces, respect is earned through blood, sweat, and countless hours of grueling training. Ranks are displayed proudly on uniforms, but sometimes the most dangerous assumptions come from what we think we see versus what actually stands before us. What happens when a decorated Navy SEAL, confident in his own achievements and status, encounters someone he believes is beneath his rank? What occurs when that split-second judgment about authority, experience, and command presence turns out to be catastrophically wrong? This is the story of Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose quiet presence masked one of the most extraordinary military careers in modern Special Forces history. It's about the moment when assumptions collided with reality, when a casual joke became a profound lesson in respect, and when a Navy SEAL learned that true leadership isn't always announced with fanfare. Some lessons in humility arrive, wrapped in the most unexpected packages. This is one of those lessons that would forever change how an elite warrior viewed rank, authority, and the dangerous game of making assumptions about who belongs where in the hierarchy of military excellence. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Coronado Naval Base as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped out of a rental car. She wore simple digital camouflage fatigues without any visible rank insignia, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. At 5 feet 6 inches, with a lean build that spoke of countless hours of physical training, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. Sarah had arrived 3 days early for the joint training exercise that would bring together various Special Forces units from across the military. As one of the lead coordinators for the operation, she wanted to personally inspect the facilities and ensure everything was ready for what would be one of the most comprehensive inter-service training programs in recent memory. The exercise, codenamed Iron Thunder, would test the limits of cooperation between Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Air Force Pararescue, and Marine Force reconnaissance units. What made Sarah's presence particularly significant was her unique background. She had started her military career as an enlisted soldier in the Army, working her way through the ranks with determination that impressed even her toughest instructors. Her transition to officer status had come after she completed a degree in international relations while serving overseas, demonstrating the kind of dedication that marked her for greater things. Her real breakthrough had come during a classified operation in Afghanistan, where her strategic thinking and ability to coordinate between different military branches had saved the lives of dozens of American servicemen. The operation had been so successful and her role so crucial that she was immediately fast-tracked for Special Forces training. What followed was a career trajectory that few could match, involving assignments that would remain classified for decades to come. But none of that was visible as she walked across the base that morning, carrying a simple clipboard and dressed like any other mid-level officer conducting routine business. The choice to keep her appearance low-key was deliberate. Sarah had learned long ago that the most effective leaders often operated from the shadows, observing and understanding situations before making their presence fully known. As she approached the main training facility, Sarah noticed a group of Navy SEALs conducting early morning PT on the adjacent field. Their synchronized movements and obvious physical conditioning marked them as members of one of the most elite units in the military. She paused for a moment to watch, not out of idle curiosity, but with the practiced eye of someone who understood the incredible dedication required to reach that level of excellence. Among the SEALs, one figure stood out. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez was clearly the informal leader of the group, his command sharp and his expectations high. Rodriguez was a 10-year veteran of the SEALs, with multiple deployments and a chest full of commendations that spoke to his courage and skill. He was exactly the type of operator that made the SEALs legendary, completely dedicated to his craft and fiercely proud of what he had achieved. Sarah continued toward the building, her mind already shifting to the logistical challenges that lay ahead. The joint exercise would push everyone involved to their limits, testing not just physical capabilities, but the ability of different military cultures to work together effectively. She had spent months planning every detail, coordinating with commanders from each service branch, and ensuring that the training scenarios would provide maximum value for all participants. Inside the facility, she began her inspection with the kind of thoroughness that had made her reputation. Every piece of equipment was checked, every safety protocol reviewed, every contingency plan examined for potential weaknesses. This attention to detail wasn't perfectionism for its own sake, but the result of having seen firsthand how small oversights could lead to catastrophic consequences in real-world operations. As Sarah worked her way through the facility, she couldn't help but think about the challenges that lay ahead. Joint operations were notoriously difficult, not because the individual units weren't excellent, but because each service had its own culture, its own way of doing things, and its own pride in what made them special. The SEALs operated with the precision of a Swiss watch, the Rangers with the relentless aggression of a pack of wolves, the Air Force pararescue with the dedication of guardian angels, and the Marines with the intensity that had made them legendary since the founding of the Corps. Her job was to find ways to blend these different approaches into something greater than the sum of its parts. It required not just tactical knowledge, but a deep understanding of military psychology and the delicate art of earning respect from people who had already proven themselves in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. The morning progressed smoothly as Sarah completed her inspection and began setting up her temporary office in one of the smaller conference rooms. She had deliberately chosen a space away from the main administrative areas, preferring to work where she could observe the flow of personnel and get a sense of the base's rhythm without being constantly interrupted by routine administrative matters. Around noon, she decided to take a break and grab lunch at the base cafeteria. This wasn't just about food, but another opportunity to observe and understand the dynamics of the units that would soon be under her coordination. The way military personnel interacted in informal settings often revealed more about their readiness and morale than any formal briefing. The cafeteria was buzzing with activity as various units took their lunch breaks. Sarah moved through the line quietly, selecting a simple meal and finding a table in a corner where she could observe without being obvious about it. She noticed how different groups clustered together, the subtle but clear boundaries between services, and the way conversations stopped and started as people moved through the space. It was then that she noticed Petty Officer Rodriguez again. He was sitting with several other SEALs, their conversation animated and clearly centered around the upcoming exercise. Rodriguez was expressing some concerns about working with other units, not out of disrespect, but from the natural protective instinct that came from being part of such a tightly knit team. "I just hope these other guys can keep up," Rodriguez was saying, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never been let down by his training or his teammates. "We got our procedures down to a science. The last thing we need is someone who doesn't understand our methods, screwing up the timing." His concerns weren't unusual or unreasonable. Every elite unit had similar worries when forced to operate outside their normal parameters. The SEAL teams were legendary for their precision and their ability to execute complex operations with minimal support. Having to coordinate with other units inevitably introduced variables that could compromise that precision. Sarah listened to the conversation with interest, not because she disagreed with Rodriguez's concerns, but because she recognized the challenge she would face in building trust between the different units. Rodriguez represented exactly the type of highly skilled, highly motivated operator who could make or break the success of a joint operation. If she could earn his respect and convince him to buy into the coordinated approach, others would follow. As she finished her lunch and prepared to return to her office, Sarah made a mental note to find opportunities to interact with Rodriguez and the other informal leaders among the various units. The success of Iron Thunder would depend not just on the official chain of command, but on winning over the sergeants, petty officers, and corporals who actually led soldiers in the field. The afternoon brought a steady stream of administrative tasks as final preparations continued for the arrival of the other units. Sarah reviewed personnel files, updated training schedules, and coordinated with base security for the increased activity that would begin the following week. Each task was handled with the same methodical attention to detail that had marked her career, but her mind kept returning to the challenge of building effective teamwork among natural competitors. As evening approached, Sarah decided to take one more walk around the base to check on evening preparations and get a sense of how personnel were settling in for the night. The base had a different feel in the fading light, quieter, but with an underlying tension that spoke to the importance of what was about to begin. She was walking past the main training building when she encountered Rodriguez again. He was conducting a final equipment check with his team, their gear laid out in precise rows that demonstrated the obsessive attention to detail that made SEALs so effective. Sarah paused to observe from a distance, impressed despite herself by the level of organization and the obvious competence of the men involved. Rodriguez noticed her watching and looked up with a mixture of curiosity and mild irritation. In the fading light, with Sarah wearing unmarked fatigues, he couldn't immediately identify her rank or unit. To him, she looked like just another mid-level officer conducting routine business, someone who probably had never faced the kind of challenges that forged real warriors. "Can we help you with something?" Rodriguez asked, his tone polite, but with an edge that suggested he didn't appreciate being observed during what was obviously a serious preparation session. Sarah smiled slightly, recognizing the protective instinct behind his question. "Just admiring the precision," she replied simply. "Your gear looks ready for anything." Rodriguez relaxed slightly at the compliment, but his expression remained guarded. "SEAL teams don't leave anything to chance," he said with obvious pride. "Every piece of equipment is checked and rechecked because lives depend on it." "That's exactly the kind of attention to detail that makes joint operations successful," Sarah replied, choosing her words carefully. "When everyone brings that level of preparation to the table, amazing things become possible." Something in her tone caught Rodriguez's attention. There was an authority there that didn't match her apparent rank, a confidence that suggested she understood exactly what she was talking about. For a moment, he studied her more carefully, trying to place her in the complex hierarchy of military personnel. "Are you involved in the upcoming exercise?" he asked, his tone now more curious than defensive. "You could say that," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "I'm looking forward to seeing what all these elite units can accomplish when they work together." Rodriguez nodded, but there was still something in his expression that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced that someone outside the SEAL community could truly understand what they brought to any operation. It was a natural bias, born of years of proving themselves in situations where second place meant death. Sarah understood his skepticism because she had faced it countless times throughout her career. Being a woman in special forces meant constantly proving herself in ways that her male counterparts never had to consider. Being someone who had come up through the enlisted ranks meant fighting for respect from officers who had never experienced the view from the bottom of the military hierarchy. And being someone whose most significant achievements were classified meant that her reputation often preceded her in ways that created more questions than answers. As the evening continued and the base settled into its nighttime routine, Sarah returned to her temporary office to complete the final preparations for what would begin the next morning. Tomorrow would bring the arrival of the other units and the beginning of a training exercise that would test everyone involved in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Looking out the window at the lights beginning to twinkle across the base, Sarah reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. Every challenge, every setback, every small victory had contributed to preparing her for the responsibility she now carried. The success or failure of Iron Thunder would have implications far beyond the immediate training value, potentially influencing how the military approached joint operations for years to come. The stage was set, the players were in position, and tomorrow would begin the process of discovering whether different military cultures could truly become something greater than the sum of their individual excellence. Sarah Mitchell was ready to find out, even though she knew that earning the respect and cooperation of people like Marcus Rodriguez would require her to reveal aspects of herself that she had kept hidden behind the understated appearance of just another officer conducting routine business. The real test was about to begin, and neither Sarah nor Rodriguez could have anticipated how profoundly it would change both their understanding of leadership, respect, and the unexpected places where true authority could be found. Dawn broke over Coronado Naval Base with the kind of crisp clarity that made California mornings legendary. Sarah Mitchell was already at her desk by 0500, reviewing final preparations as the first transport vehicles began arriving with personnel from the other military branches. The next few hours would set the tone for everything that followed, and she was determined that Iron Thunder would begin with the kind of precision that would impress even the most skeptical participants. The Army Rangers arrived first, their convoy of vehicles moving with a disciplined efficiency that had made them legendary since their formation in World War II. Sarah watched from her office window as they disembarked, immediately forming up in perfect ranks despite having traveled for hours. Their commander, Major William Hayes, was a 20-year veteran whose reputation preceded him. Hayes had led Rangers through some of the most challenging operations of the past decade, and his presence lent immediate credibility to the exercise. Next came the Air Force pararescue teams, their distinctive maroon berets marking them as members of one of the most elite rescue units in the world. These were the men who dropped into impossible situations to save lives, often operating alone behind enemy lines with nothing but their training and determination. Their commander, Captain Lisa Park, was one of the few women to have successfully completed the grueling pararescue training pipeline, making her a natural ally for Sarah in navigating the complex dynamics of military gender integration. The Marine Force reconnaissance units arrived with the understated confidence that marked the Corps' most elite operators. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, had earned his reputation during multiple deployments where Marines were called upon to accomplish the impossible. Morrison's presence was particularly significant because the Marines had initially been reluctant to participate in joint training, preferring to maintain their traditional independence and self-reliance. As each unit settled into their designated areas, Sarah observed the subtle territorial behaviors that always emerged when elite units were forced to share space. Each group claimed their corner of the base with the kind of quiet possessiveness that spoke to deep pride in their unique capabilities and traditions. The Rangers set up with military precision. The Air Force teams organized their equipment with technical expertise, and the Marines established their area with the efficiency born of countless field operations. The SEALs, already established on the base, watched the newcomers with a calm assessment of professionals evaluating potential allies or threats. Rodriguez was particularly attentive to the arriving units, his experienced eye noting everything from their gear configurations to the way they interacted with their officers. This wasn't casual curiosity, but the instinctive evaluation that came from years of operations where understanding your partners could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Around 0800, Sarah made her way to the main briefing room, where she would conduct the initial orientation for all unit commanders. This would be her first formal interaction with most of the personnel, and she was acutely aware that first impressions would heavily influence everything that followed. The challenge was to establish her authority without appearing to diminish the considerable expertise and experience of the men and women she would be coordinating. The briefing room filled quickly as commanders and senior enlisted personnel from all units took their seats. The arrangement was telling. Each service naturally clustered together, creating distinct zones that reflected both comfort levels and traditional loyalties. Sarah had anticipated this and had deliberately chosen a presentation format that would require interaction across service boundaries from the very beginning. Major Hayes settled into his seat with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, his eyes already analyzing the setup and making preliminary assessments about the exercise's potential value. Captain Park chose a position where she could observe both the presenter and the other participants, her intelligence background evident in the way she positioned herself for maximum information gathering. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison sat with the relaxed alertness of a Marine who had seen enough combat to know when to conserve energy and when to focus intensity. Rodriguez and several other senior enlisted personnel from various units occupied seats in the back, their positioning reflecting both respect for the formal hierarchy and the practical understanding that they would ultimately be responsible for implementing whatever plans emerged from the briefing. This group represented the real expertise that would make or break any joint operation, and Sarah was particularly focused on earning their buy-in. As Sarah entered the briefing room, conversations gradually died down and attention focused forward. She moved to the podium with the kind of confident calm that came from having briefed everyone from squad leaders to generals, but there was something different about this audience. These were people who had proven themselves in the most demanding circumstances imaginable, and they wouldn't be impressed by rank alone or swayed by empty rhetoric. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge what each of you represents. This room contains some of the most elite military personnel in the world, people who have dedicated their lives to mastering their crafts and serving their country with distinction. Iron Thunder isn't designed to teach you how to be better at what you already do superbly. It's designed to explore how your individual excellence can be multiplied through coordination and cooperation." The opening struck exactly the right tone, acknowledging their expertise while introducing the collaborative challenge ahead. Sarah could see subtle shifts in posture and expression that indicated she had their attention, but winning attention was different from earning respect. that would require demonstrating knowledge and understanding that match their own hard-won expertise. Each of your units brings unique capabilities that are essentially irreplaceable, Sarah continued, moving away from the podium to create a more conversational atmosphere. SEALs excel at precision maritime operations that others can't match. Rangers bring an aggressive versatility that has made them indispensable for decades. Pararescue teams possess life-saving capabilities that exist nowhere else in the military. Force Reconnaissance Marines combine intelligence gathering with direct action in ways that are uniquely effective. The question isn't whether you're individually excellent. That's already proven. The question is whether we can combine that excellence into something even more powerful. Rodriguez found himself nodding slightly despite his initial skepticism. This officer, whoever she was, clearly understood what each unit brought to the table. Her assessment of SEAL capabilities was accurate without being inflated, and her recognition of the other unit's strengths suggested she had done her homework rather than simply reading from standard descriptions. Sarah moved into the tactical overview of Iron Thunder, describing scenarios that had been carefully crafted to require genuine cooperation rather than simply parallel operations. The first phase would involve a complex hostage rescue, where SEALs would conduct the primary assault, Rangers would provide perimeter security and quick reaction capability, Pararescue would handle casualty evacuation, and Force Reconnaissance would provide intelligence and communications coordination. The scenario is designed to be impossible for any single unit to complete successfully, Sarah explained, displaying tactical maps that showed the complexity of the simulated operation. Success requires not just coordination, but integration of capabilities in ways that multiply effectiveness. This isn't about one unit supporting another. It's about creating something new through the combination of your individual strengths. Major Hayes leaned forward with interest. The scenario was genuinely challenging, requiring the kind of complex coordination that he had attempted before with mixed results. The failure points were obvious to someone with his experience, but the potential for success was equally clear if the coordination could be executed properly. His assessment of the briefing officer was undergoing rapid revision as he recognized the sophisticated understanding of joint operations reflected in the planning. Captain Park was equally impressed by the attention to detail in the casualty evacuation procedures. Too often, medical considerations were treated as afterthoughts in training exercises, but these scenarios showed clear understanding of the critical timing and resource requirements that made the difference between successful rescue and tragic loss. The coordination requirements between her pararescue teams and the assault elements showed planning that could only come from someone who understood the realities of combat medicine. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison studied the intelligence coordination requirements with professional interest. The scenarios required his force reconnaissance teams to provide real-time intelligence updates while simultaneously coordinating communications between all participating units. It was exactly the kind of challenging multitasking that Marines excelled at, but the integration requirements were more sophisticated than he typically encountered in joint exercises. As Sarah moved through the various training phases, it became clear that Iron Thunder represented months of careful planning and deep understanding of each unit's capabilities and limitations. The progression from simple coordination exercises to complex integrated operations showed the kind of systematic approach that would actually build real capabilities rather than simply providing an opportunity for different units to show off their individual skills. Phase 2 will increase the complexity by introducing time-critical decision-making under communications constraints, Sarah continued, describing scenarios where units would need to adapt to changing situations without the luxury of detailed coordination meetings. This is where we discover whether the integration achieved in Phase 1 can survive the kind of chaos that characterizes real operations. Rodriguez was increasingly intrigued despite himself. The scenarios being described matched the kind of challenges he had faced in actual operations, but with coordination requirements that went beyond anything he had previously experienced. The briefing officer was clearly someone who understood that real-world operations rarely went according to plan and that successful units needed to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Phase 3 represents full integration exercises where traditional unit boundaries become secondary to mission requirements, Sarah explained, reaching the most challenging part of the training progression. Personnel will be cross-attached to other units, communication protocols will be unified, and success will depend entirely on the ability to function as a single coordinated force rather than separate units working in parallel. The room was completely silent as the implications of Phase 3 sank in. This went far beyond traditional joint operations into territory that challenged fundamental assumptions about how elite units maintain their effectiveness. The potential benefits were enormous, but so were the risks of diluting the unit cohesion that made each group so effective. Major Hayes was the first to speak, his question direct and challenging. What's your background with integrated operations at this level? This kind of training requires understanding that usually comes from extensive field experience with joint coordination. It was exactly the kind of question that Sarah had been expecting, and her response would determine whether she gained the credibility necessary to make Iron Thunder successful. The room was waiting for her answer, and she could feel the collective assessment of people who had no patience for theoretical expertise that wasn't backed by real-world experience. My background includes classified operations where successful coordination between multiple special operations units was the difference between mission success and mission failure, Sarah replied simply. I can't provide specific details, but I can tell you that every scenario in Iron Thunder is based on challenges I've encountered in actual operations where the stakes were considerably higher than training exercises. The answer was both revealing and mysterious, acknowledging real experience while respecting operational security requirements. For people accustomed to classified operations, this kind of response was familiar and actually increased rather than decreased credibility. Someone making false claims would have provided more details, not fewer. Rodriguez found himself reassessing his initial impression of the briefing officer. Her understanding of SEAL capabilities had been accurate. Her tactical knowledge was clearly extensive, and her approach to the coordination challenges showed practical experience rather than theoretical knowledge. He was beginning to suspect that there was more to this apparently low-ranking officer than her appearance suggested. As the briefing continued through the final logistical details and safety protocols, Sarah could sense the shift in the room's atmosphere. Initial skepticism was giving way to professional interest, and the questions being asked showed genuine engagement with the training possibilities rather than polite tolerance of another mandatory exercise. One final point, Sarah concluded, returning to the podium for her closing remarks. Iron Thunder will only be successful if everyone approaches it with the same commitment to excellence that made you elite operators in the first place. This isn't about proving which unit is best. It's about discovering what becomes possible when the best work together with complete trust and integration. The briefing ended with the kind of subdued energy that marked professional military personnel when they recognized a genuinely worthwhile challenge. As people began filing out of the room, conversations immediately started about the implications of what they had just heard and the opportunities and risks that lay ahead. Rodriguez lingered near his seat, ostensibly organizing his notes, but actually observing the briefing officer as she responded to questions from the various commanders. There was something about her bearing and the way she answered technical questions that didn't match his initial assessment of her rank and experience. His curiosity was growing, and he made a mental note to learn more about who exactly was coordinating this exercise. Sarah noticed Rodriguez's attention, but didn't acknowledge it directly. She understood that earning the respect of a senior enlisted personnel would be crucial to Iron Thunder's success, and that process couldn't be rushed or forced. It would require demonstrating competence through actions rather than words, and proving that her understanding of elite operations was based on genuine experience rather than academic study. As the briefing room emptied and personnel began moving toward their first training sessions, Sarah reflected on the success of the initial presentation. She had gained the attention and interest of some of the most demanding military professionals in the world, but that was only the beginning. The real test would come when the actual training began, and she would need to demonstrate that her coordination could enhance rather than hinder their natural effectiveness. The stage was set for Iron Thunder to begin in earnest, and everyone involved understood that the next few days would determine whether this ambitious experiment in joint operations would become a model for future military cooperation or simply another well-intentioned training exercise that failed to live up to its potential. Sarah Mitchell was ready for the challenge, even though she knew that her most difficult test would come not from the complexity of the operations, but from earning the complete trust and respect of warriors who had learned through bitter experience to be skeptical of anyone who hadn't proven themselves in the crucible of actual combat. The first training exercise began at 0600 sharp, with Sarah positioned at the central command post that had been established overlooking the mock urban warfare facility. From this vantage point, she could monitor all 4 participating units as they prepared for the initial coordination challenge, a complex scenario involving the rescue of hostages from a fortified compound while dealing with multiple time-sensitive complications. The setup was deliberately challenging, designed to require genuine cooperation rather than allowing units to operate independently in their comfort zones. The compound contained 3 separate buildings, each requiring different tactical approaches, while simulated civilians complicated every potential action. Success would depend not just on individual unit excellence, but on real-time coordination and adaptation as the situation evolved. Rodriguez led his SEAL team through their final equipment checks with a methodical precision that had kept him alive through countless real operations. His team would handle the primary assault on the main building, but their success depended entirely on the other units executing their supporting roles with perfect timing. It was exactly the kind of interdependence that made SEALs uncomfortable, accustomed as they were to missions where they controlled every variable through superior preparation and training. Remember, we're not just watching our own backs on this one, Rodriguez told his team as they moved toward their starting positions. Success means trusting people we've never operated with before to be exactly where they need to be when we need them there. No room for doubt, no room for hesitation. His words carried the authority of someone who had earned the absolute trust of his teammates through years of shared danger. But there was an edge of uncertainty that reflected the challenge of extending that same trust to unfamiliar units. The SEAL ethos demanded perfection, and perfection seemed more difficult to achieve when success depended on coordinating with people whose methods and capabilities were largely unknown. Major Hayes positioned his Rangers around the compound's perimeter, their role equally critical, but requiring a different kind of discipline. They would provide security against external threats, while maintaining quick reaction capability to support any of the other units if complications arose. For Rangers accustomed to taking aggressive action, the requirement to maintain defensive positions while others conducted the primary mission required a different kind of professional discipline. Our job is to make sure nobody gets surprised, Hayes briefed his team leaders. Keep your eyes open, trust your training, and remember that the success of this entire operation depends on us doing our job perfectly, even if it means we don't get to be the heroes today. The Ranger mindset embraced the concept of shared mission success, but Hayes knew that his biggest challenge would be keeping his aggressive operators focused on their supporting role rather than looking for opportunities to take more direct action. Rangers were trained to seize initiative and press advantages, qualities that would need to be carefully channeled to support the coordinated approach. Captain Park supervised the positioning of her pararescue teams at carefully chosen locations that would allow rapid response to casualties regardless of which building they emerged from. Her people carried the heaviest burden in terms of potential consequences, since any mistakes in the assault phases would become their immediate responsibility. The medical evacuation requirements had been calculated down to the second, with backup plans for every possible complication. We're not just treating wounded, Park reminded her teams. We're the safety net that allows the assault teams to take necessary risks. Every second we save in evacuation procedures directly translates to lives saved and mission success. The pararescue teams understood that their role, while not involving direct combat, carried the highest stakes in terms of human consequences. Their training emphasized that combat medicine under fire required not just technical expertise, but the kind of calm competence that could function effectively regardless of the chaos surrounding them. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison deployed his Force Reconnaissance Marines in positions that would allow them to provide real-time intelligence updates while coordinating communications between all participating units. The Marines carried the additional responsibility of maintaining situational awareness for the entire operation, a task that required them to think beyond their traditional focus on gathering intelligence to actively managing information flow. We're the nervous system for this operation, Morrison told his team leaders. Every piece of information has to get to the right place at the right time, and every communication failure puts everyone else at risk. This is where attention to detail becomes a life or death skill. The Marine culture emphasized adaptability and improvisation, but the communication coordination requirements demanded a level of systematic precision that challenged their preference for flexible response to developing situations. Success would require combining Marine adaptability with the kind of rigid attention to detail more commonly associated with technical operations. At exactly 0630, Sarah gave the signal for the exercise to begin, and immediately the carefully planned coordination began facing the test of implementation under pressure. The initial phase required all units to move into their positions simultaneously while maintaining communication silence to avoid detection by the simulated enemy forces defending the compound. Rodriguez led his SEALs toward their assault position using movement techniques perfected through countless hours of training, but he found himself constantly checking his watch and estimating the positions of units he couldn't see. The success of their assault depended on the Rangers being in position to prevent reinforcements, the pararescue teams being ready for immediate casualty evacuation, and the Marines maintaining communication links that would allow real-time adaptation to changing circumstances. From her observation post, Sarah monitored the progress of all 4 units through a combination of tracking devices and communication intercepts. The initial movement phase was proceeding smoothly, but she could see the subtle hesitations and adjustments that indicated each unit was working outside their normal comfort zone. The challenge would come when the pressure increased and instinctive responses had to be modified to support the coordinated approach. Phase 1 initiation in 30 seconds came the word through the communication network as all units reported ready. Sarah felt the familiar tension that preceded any complex operation. Even training exercises where the only casualties would be to pride and professional reputation. The next few minutes would reveal whether months of planning could survive contact with the reality of coordinating elite units under pressure. The assault phase began with textbook precision as Rodriguez's SEALs breached the main building, while Hayes's Rangers established perimeter security. The initial coordination was flawless, with each unit executing their assigned roles exactly as planned. But within minutes, the exercise controllers introduced the first complication: simulated reinforcements approaching from an unexpected direction that threatened to overwhelm the Ranger perimeter. "Contact east, multiple vehicles approaching the compound," came Morrison's voice over the communication network. "Rangers are about to be outnumbered. SEALs, what's your status inside?" Rodriguez found himself in exactly the situation that made joint operations so challenging. His team was halfway through clearing the building and had located several hostages, but the Ranger perimeter was under pressure that could compromise the entire operation. Traditional SEAL doctrine would have his team complete their mission regardless of what was happening outside, but the coordinated approach required him to consider the broader tactical situation. SEALs have located hostages in Building 1, require another 4 minutes to complete clearance and prepare for extraction, Rodriguez reported, his voice betraying none of the frustration he felt at having to modify his preferred approach. Sarah watched the developing situation with professional interest, recognizing it as exactly the kind of real-world complexity that separated successful joint operations from theoretical coordination. The exercise controllers had introduced the complication at precisely the moment when all units were committed to their primary tasks, forcing decisions about whether to maintain original plans or adapt to changing circumstances. "Rangers, can you hold your positions for 4 more minutes?" came Sarah's voice over the command frequency, her tone calm, but carrying the authority of someone making tactical decisions under pressure. "We can hold, but it's going to be tight," Hayes responded, his Rangers already engaging the simulated reinforcements with the disciplined fire control that was their trademark. "Pararescue, we're going to need you to be ready for multiple casualties when this phase is complete." Park's teams immediately began preparing for the possibility of treating wounded from all participating units, a scenario that required them to prioritize casualties from different services according to medical need rather than unit loyalty. It was exactly the kind of situation where professional training had to override natural human preferences for taking care of your own people first. The pressure continued building as Morrison's Marines provided real-time updates on the developing tactical situation while Rodriguez's SEALs completed their building clearance. The coordination was holding together, but everyone involved could feel the strain of maintaining unity of effort while dealing with complications that threatened to overwhelm their original plans. Building 1 clear, 6 hostages secured, and ready for extraction, Rodriguez finally reported. "SEALs are ready to move to extraction point on your command." "Rangers, what's your status?" Sarah asked, her question carrying the weight of a decision point that would determine whether the exercise continued according to plan or required immediate adaptation. Rangers have suppressed the reinforcements, but ammunition is running low, Hayes responded. We can provide covering fire for extraction, but we need to move fast. The moment had arrived when theoretical coordination had to become practical decision-making under pressure. Sarah could order the extraction to proceed according to the original plan, accepting the risk of Ranger casualties, or she could modify the approach to reduce risk while potentially compromising the mission timeline. All units execute extraction phase alpha, Sarah commanded, implementing one of several contingency plans that had been developed for exactly the situation. Marines will coordinate leapfrog movement to extraction point. Rangers will provide covering fire in sequence. Pararescue will establish triage at secondary location. SEALs will escort hostages using Route 3. The modified extraction plan required split-second timing and absolute trust between units that had never operated together before. Rodriguez found himself depending on Ranger fire support, while Morrison's Marines coordinated movement that kept everyone out of each other's fields of fire. Park's pararescue teams positioned themselves to provide immediate medical support for an extraction that was far more complicated than originally planned. For the next 8 minutes, the coordination held together through a combination of professional training, careful planning, and the kind of adaptability that marked truly elite military units. Each team modified their preferred procedures to support the overall mission while maintaining their individual standards of excellence. It was exactly the kind of integration that Iron Thunder was designed to test and develop. All hostages secure, all personnel accounted for, exercise phase 1 complete, came the final report as all units reached their designated safe zones. The simulation had been successful, but everyone involved understood that success had come through constant adaptation rather than smooth execution of the original plan. As personnel began moving toward the after-action review area, Rodriguez found himself reassessing both the exercise and the officer who had coordinated it. The modifications to the extraction plan had been tactically sound and had demonstrated understanding of each unit's capabilities under pressure. More importantly, the command decisions had been made quickly enough to be effective, but carefully enough to account for the safety of all personnel involved. That was more complicated than I expected, Rodriguez commented to one of his teammates as they secured their equipment. Whoever planned this exercise understands what real operations feel like. His assessment was shared by personnel from all the participating units. The exercise had been challenging enough to be genuinely instructive while remaining safe enough to allow people to take necessary risks. Most importantly, it had required the kind of real-time coordination and adaptation that characterized actual special operations. Sarah observed the after-action discussions with satisfaction, noting the animated conversations between personnel from different units as they compared their experiences and began building the personal relationships that would make future coordination more effective. The first phase of Iron Thunder had accomplished exactly what she had hoped. It had proven that integration was possible while identifying the specific challenges that would need to be addressed in subsequent training. The success of the first exercise had established her credibility with the participating units, but Sarah knew that the real test would come in the more challenging phases ahead. Each subsequent exercise would increase the complexity and reduce the margin for error, ultimately testing whether the cooperation achieved under controlled conditions could survive the kind of pressure that characterized actual combat operations. Rodriguez lingered near the equipment area after most personnel had moved on to the formal debrief. His attention focused on the coordination officer, who had managed the exercise with such apparent expertise. There was something about her decision-making under pressure and her obvious understanding of special operations that didn't match his initial assessment of her rank and experience. His curiosity was becoming genuine interest in understanding exactly who was running Iron Thunder and what kind of background had prepared her for coordinating elite units with such apparent ease. The foundation had been laid for the more challenging exercises ahead, but Sarah understood that success in Phase 1 was only the beginning. Each subsequent phase would push the participating units further outside their comfort zones while testing whether the trust and coordination developed in controlled conditions could survive when the pressure increased and the margin for error decreased. The real test of Iron Thunder was still to come, and with it, the moment when assumptions about rank, authority, and competence would be tested in ways that no one yet anticipated. The second day of Iron Thunder began with Phase 2 exercises designed to test coordination under communications constraints. time pressure that more closely simulated real combat conditions. Sarah had deliberately increased the complexity while reducing the safety margins, creating scenarios where success would require not just cooperation, but genuine integration of capabilities under pressure that would reveal the true character of each unit and their ability to function as a unified force. The morning briefing was notably different from the first day, with personnel from different units sitting together rather than clustering by service affiliation. The success of the previous day's exercises had begun breaking down the natural barriers between elite units, creating the foundation for the deeper integration that Phase 2 would require. But Sarah knew that the real test was about to begin, as the scenarios ahead would push everyone involved far beyond their comfort zones. Today's exercises are designed around the principle that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, Sarah announced to the assembled personnel. You'll be operating with limited communications, changing mission parameters, and situations where your original assignments become impossible to complete as planned. Success will depend entirely on your ability to adapt and support each other when everything goes wrong. Rodriguez listened to the briefing with growing interest, noting how the coordination officer seemed to anticipate exactly the kinds of challenges that had made his real-world operations so demanding. Her understanding of the psychological pressure that came with operating under communications blackout and changing mission parameters suggested experience that went far beyond theoretical knowledge of special operations. The first scenario of Phase 2 placed all units in a simulated urban environment where they had to locate and neutralize multiple threats while protecting civilians and dealing with electronic warfare that would intermittently disable their communications equipment. Unlike the previous day's exercises, there was no central coordination once the mission began. Success would depend on the ability of individual unit leaders to make decisions that supported the overall mission even when they couldn't communicate with other elements. Major Hayes found himself leading his Rangers through a section of the urban mock-up where intelligence had indicated the presence of hostile forces, but the electronic warfare environment meant he couldn't confirm the positions of the other units or receive updated mission parameters. The Ranger training emphasized aggressive action and seizing initiative, but the joint operation required him to consider how his decisions would affect units he couldn't see or communicate with. We stick to the original plan until we have reason to deviate, Hayes told his team leaders as they prepared to enter their assigned sector. But everyone keeps their eyes open for opportunities to support the other units, even if we can't coordinate directly. The challenge for Hayes was leading Rangers in a way that maintained their aggressive effectiveness, while ensuring their actions complemented rather than complicated the missions of the other units. It required a level of tactical empathy that went beyond traditional Ranger training, forcing him to think like a SEAL, a pararescue operator, and a force reconnaissance Marine simultaneously. Rodriguez faced an even more complex challenge as his SEAL team moved through their assigned sector. SEALs were accustomed to operating with complete mission control and detailed intelligence, but the exercise scenario required them to adapt to changing situations while supporting other units whose capabilities and limitations they were still learning to understand. Remember, we're not the only people in this fight, Rodriguez reminded his team as they approached their objective. Everything we do has to account for friendlies operating in adjacent areas, even if we can't see them or talk to them. The SEAL mindset emphasized precision and control, but the joint operation required accepting uncertainty and trusting that other units would execute their assigned roles even without direct supervision. It was a psychological challenge that went to the heart of what made SEALs so effective, their ability to control every variable through superior preparation and training. Captain Park deployed her pararescue teams in mobile configurations that would allow them to respond to casualties from any of the participating units. But the communications constraints meant she had to anticipate medical needs without detailed information about the tactical situation. Pararescue training emphasized adaptability and improvisation, but the joint operation required her to coordinate medical support for units whose operational methods she was still learning. We positioned for maximum flexibility and prepare for everything, Park told her teams. In this environment, we won't know what we're dealing with until casualties start appearing, so we have to be ready for anything. The medical support challenge was complicated by the fact that different units had different casualty evacuation procedures and different tolerances for operational risk. Parks teams had to be prepared to provide medical support that matched the tactical requirements of units, whose operational philosophies range from the aggressive directness of Rangers to the methodical precision of SEALs. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison positioned his Force Reconnaissance Marines to provide intelligence and communication support, but the electronic warfare environment meant that traditional communication methods would be unreliable at best. The Marines would have to maintain situational awareness for the entire operation while dealing with equipment failures and communications blackouts that could leave other units operating blind. "We become the eyes and ears for everyone," Morrison briefed his teams. "When normal communications fail, we find ways to get critical information where it needs to go." Improvisation becomes a survival skill. The challenge for Morrison was maintaining intelligence coordination when the normal tools for that coordination were either unreliable or completely unavailable. It required the kind of innovative thinking that Marines were famous for, but applied to support requirements that went far beyond traditional Marine missions. At 0800, Sarah initiated the exercise with full knowledge that the scenario was designed to push all participating units to their breaking points. The communications constraints and mission complexity were deliberately overwhelming, creating the kind of pressure that would reveal whether the cooperation achieved in Phase 1 could survive when everything started going wrong simultaneously. The first hour proceeded with deceptive smoothness as all units moved into their assigned areas and began executing their missions according to the original plan. But Sarah and the exercise controllers had carefully timed the introduction of complications that would test every aspect of the coordination they had spent the previous day developing. At 0900, the first major complication hit when simulated casualties in Rodriguez's sector required immediate medical evacuation. But communications failures meant that Parks pararescue teams had no direct way to coordinate with the SEALs for the evacuation procedures. The situation required both units to improvise coordination methods while dealing with time pressure that made every decision critical. Rodriguez found himself in the position of having wounded teammates who needed immediate medical attention, but without the ability to provide Parks teams with the tactical information they needed to safely enter his sector. The SEAL training emphasized self-reliance and internal solutions to problems, but the joint operation required him to trust medical support from people operating with incomplete information about his tactical situation. "We're going to have to trust the pararescue teams to figure out how to reach us," Rodriguez told his medic. "Our job is to secure the area and get our wounded to a position where they could be evacuated safely." Parks teams faced the complementary challenge of providing medical support without the detailed tactical information they normally received before entering a potentially hostile area. Pararescue training emphasized operating in dangerous environments, but usually with better intelligence about the specific threats they were likely to encounter. "We go in prepared for anything and adapt to whatever we find," Park decided. "The SEALs will have done everything possible to secure the area, but we have to be ready for surprises." The evacuation proceeded through a combination of professional training, careful improvisation, and the kind of trust that could only be developed through shared experience under pressure. Both teams modified their preferred procedures to accommodate the other's requirements, creating an integrated approach that was different from either unit's standard methods, but proved effective under the circumstances. The success of the medical evacuation was barely complete when the second major complication emerged. Hayes's Rangers encountered a simulated threat that was larger and more dangerous than intelligence had predicted, requiring immediate support that could only be provided by modifying the missions of the other units. But with communications severely limited, coordination of that support would require innovation and trust that pushed everyone involved beyond their normal operational parameters. "We have a serious problem in Sector 3, Hayes reported during one of the brief communication windows that the exercise controllers allowed. "Rangers are outnumbered and need immediate support, but I don't know what other units can provide without compromising their own missions." The request put Sarah in exactly the position that made joint operations so challenging. She had to coordinate support between units operating with limited information while ensuring that mission modifications didn't create cascading problems that would compromise the entire operation. Her response would be carefully observed by everyone involved as a measure of her ability to make tactical decisions under the kind of pressure that characterized real combat operations. "All units, prepare for Mission Modification Alpha 3, Sarah responded, implementing another of the contingency plans that had been developed for exactly this kind of situation. SEALs will provide support to Ranger Sector while maintaining their primary mission timeline. Marines will coordinate movement to prevent friendly fire incidents. Pararescue will reposition to support multiple sectors simultaneously. The modified mission plan required every unit to expand their operational focus while maintaining their individual missions, a task that pushed the coordination requirements beyond anything they had previously attempted. Rodriguez's SEALs had to provide fire support for Rangers while continuing their own building clearance operations. Morrison's Marines had to coordinate movement for units operating in overlapping areas while maintaining their intelligence-gathering responsibilities. Parts pararescue teams had to prepare for casualties from multiple sectors simultaneously while repositioning their equipment under time pressure. For the next 30 minutes, the exercise became a test of whether theoretical integration could survive the kind of complexity that characterized real combat operations. Every decision created consequences that affected other units, and every unit had to modify their preferred methods to account for the needs and capabilities of their partners. Rodriguez found himself directing SEAL precision fire to support Ranger assault techniques that were different from his own unit's preferred methods. The coordination required him to understand not just what support the Rangers needed, but how to provide that support in ways that complemented rather than complicated their operational approach. Hayes discovered that accepting SEAL fire support required him to modify Ranger assault techniques to avoid interfering with SEAL precision requirements. The integration challenged his unit's preference for aggressive, overwhelming action with a need to coordinate with partners who operated according to different principles. Morrison's Marines became the critical link that made coordination possible, using innovative communication methods to maintain situational awareness for units that couldn't communicate directly with each other. The challenge pushed Marine adaptability and improvisation to levels that tested the limits of their training. Parts pararescue teams found themselves treating casualties from multiple units simultaneously while coordinating evacuation procedures that had to account for the different operational requirements of SEALs, Rangers, and Marines. The medical support challenge required understanding not just combat medicine, but the tactical philosophies that determined how different units approach casualty evacuation. As the exercise reached its climax, all participating units were operating at the edge of their capabilities while maintaining coordination that required constant adaptation and innovation. The pressure was intense enough that several minor breakdowns in coordination occurred, creating learning opportunities that would be invaluable for future joint operations. The exercise concluded with all missions successfully completed, but everyone involved understood that success had been achieved through constant adaptation rather than smooth execution of predetermined plans. The integration had held together, but only because every unit had been willing to modify their preferred methods to support the overall mission requirements. During the immediate after-action discussion, Rodriguez found himself genuinely impressed by the coordination that had been achieved under pressure that would have overwhelmed most joint operations. The exercise had pushed every participating unit beyond their comfort zones while maintaining safety standards that allowed genuine risk-taking without actual danger. That was the most realistic joint training I've ever participated in, Rodriguez commented to his teammates. Whoever designed these scenarios understands what real operations feel like when everything starts going wrong at once. His assessment reflected the growing recognition among all participants that Iron Thunder was providing training value that went far beyond typical joint exercises. The scenarios were challenging enough to be genuinely instructive while remaining safe enough to allow the kind of risk-taking that built real operational capabilities. But as impressive as the coordination had been, Rodriguez was becoming increasingly curious about the officer who had managed such complex operations with apparent ease. Her decision-making under pressure and obvious understanding of special operations continued to suggest experience and expertise that didn't match her apparent rank. His interest was no longer casual curiosity, but genuine respect for competence that deserved recognition. The success of Phase 2 had proven that integration was possible even under extreme pressure, but it had also revealed the officer coordinating Iron Thunder possessed knowledge and capabilities that extended far beyond what her appearance suggested. The foundation was laid for Phase 3, which would test whether the integration achieved under controlled training conditions could survive scenarios that more closely approximated the chaos and unpredictability of actual combat operations. Sarah observed the after-action discussions with satisfaction, noting how personnel from different units were now freely sharing experiences and techniques in ways that would have been impossible before they had operated together under pressure. The personal relationships and professional respect that had developed during Phase 2 would be crucial for the even more challenging exercises that lay ahead. The real test was still to come, and with it, the moment when Rodriguez's growing curiosity about the coordination officer would lead to discoveries that would fundamentally change his understanding of rank, authority, and the unexpected places where true expertise could be found. Phase 3 of Iron Thunder was scheduled to begin on Friday morning with the most ambitious scenario yet attempted, a full integration exercise where traditional unit boundaries would be dissolved and personnel would be cross-attached to create mixed teams that combine capabilities from all participating services. Sarah knew this represented the ultimate test of everything they had accomplished over the previous 4 days, and success would require trust and cooperation that went beyond professional respect to genuine belief in shared mission success. Thursday evening found Rodriguez conducting maintenance on his equipment in the team room that his SEAL unit had been assigned. The past 4 days had challenged his preconceptions about joint operations in ways he was still processing, and his respect for the coordination officer managing Iron Thunder had grown with each successfully completed exercise. But his curiosity about her background and qualifications had also intensified, driven by recognition that her expertise extended far beyond what her apparent rank would suggest. As Rodriguez worked on his gear, he reflected on the evolution of his thinking about the exercise and its coordinator. Initially skeptical about both the value of joint training and the qualifications of the officer running it, he had been forced to acknowledge that Iron Thunder was providing training value that exceeded his expectations. More importantly, the tactical decisions and coordination abilities displayed by the exercise coordinator suggested experience that deserve investigation and recognition. "I'm going to find out more about the officer running this show," Rodriguez mentioned to his teammate who was working on equipment at the adjacent table. Someone with her understanding of special operations should be better known in the community. His comment reflected a growing consensus among senior enlisted personnel from all participating units that the coordination officer possessed qualifications that weren't immediately apparent. The decision-making under pressure, tactical expertise, and ability to coordinate complex operations suggested background and experience that merited recognition and respect. Rodriguez's opportunity for investigation came when he noticed the coordination officer working alone in the command center, reviewing plans for the following day's exercise while most other personnel had moved on to evening activities. This seemed like an appropriate time for a respectful inquiry about her background and qualifications, driven by genuine professional interest rather than casual curiosity. He approached the command center with the careful respect that marked interactions between professionals who had earned mutual recognition through shared challenges. The coordination officer was studying tactical displays with the kind of focused attention that Rodriguez recognized as the mark of someone who understood that details mattered in ways that could determine mission success or failure. "Excuse me, ma'am," Rodriguez said, using the respectful address appropriate for any officer regardless of apparent rank. "I wanted to thank you for the quality of training we've received this week. These exercises have been the most realistic joint operations training I've experienced." Sarah looked up from the tactical displays with a slight smile that acknowledged both his compliment and the respectful manner in which it was offered. She could see the curiosity behind his formal politeness and understood that his interest in her background was driven by professional respect rather than idle questioning. "Thank you, Petty Officer Rodriguez," Sarah replied, demonstrating that she had learned the names and backgrounds of all key personnel involved in Iron Thunder. "Your SEAL team's performance has been exceptional, and your willingness to adapt to joint operations has made a significant contribution to everyone's success." Rodriguez felt a slight surprise that she knew his name and had apparently been tracking his unit's performance individually, suggesting attention to detail that went beyond general oversight responsibilities. This level of personal awareness of participants indicated either exceptional preparation or the kind of hands-on leadership style that characterized experienced special operations officers. "If I may ask, ma'am, what's your background with special operations?" Rodriguez inquired, framing his question in terms that acknowledged both his curiosity and her right to maintain operational security about sensitive assignments. "Your understanding of our capabilities and The way you've structured these exercises suggests extensive experience with joint operations. The question was respectfully phrased, but direct enough to indicate genuine professional interest. Sarah recognized that Rodriguez's inquiry reflected growing respect rather than skepticism, and that her response would determine how their interaction proceeded. She also understood that his curiosity was shared by senior personnel from all participating units, making this an opportunity to address questions that had been building throughout the week. My background includes assignments where successful coordination between multiple special operations units was mission critical, Sarah replied, providing information while maintaining appropriate operational security. I've had the opportunity to work with SEAL teams, Rangers, pararescue, and Force Reconnaissance Marines in situations where integration wasn't just beneficial but essential for mission success. Rodriguez's attention sharpened at her response, which suggested field experience with special operations units rather than the administrative or planning assignments that typically provided officers with theoretical knowledge of joint operations. Her phrasing indicated that she had worked with rather than simply coordinated elite units, suggesting a level of operational involvement that would explain her practical understanding of their capabilities and limitations. That kind of experience is unusual for someone at your apparent rank, Rodriguez observed carefully, hoping to encourage her to provide more specific information about her qualifications without appearing to question her authority inappropriately. Sarah studied Rodriguez for a moment, recognizing that his inquiry reflected the kind of professional assessment that was natural among elite military personnel. She understood that his growing respect for her competence was creating curiosity about qualifications that didn't match his expectations, and that addressing his questions directly would be more effective than maintaining unnecessary mystery. Appearances can be misleading, Petty Officer Rodriguez, Sarah said with a slight smile. My career path has been somewhat unconventional, involving assignments that don't always reflect traditional rank progression. Before Rodriguez could respond to her somewhat cryptic answer, the command center door opened and Lieutenant Colonel Morrison entered, followed immediately by Major Hayes and Captain Park. All three officers were engaged in animated discussion about the following day's exercise, but their conversation stopped when they noticed Rodriguez's presence near the coordination officer. Sorry to interrupt, Morrison said, addressing both Rodriguez and Sarah. We wanted to discuss some final details about tomorrow's cross-attachment procedures. No interruption at all, Sarah replied. Petty Officer Rodriguez was asking about the background experience that informed Iron Thunder's design. It's a reasonable question that I'm sure others have been wondering about as well. Hayes studied the interaction with interest, noting the respectful manner in which Rodriguez had approached the coordination officer and the comfortable way she had responded to his inquiry. As someone accustomed to evaluating military personnel, Hayes had also been curious about the qualifications that had prepared the coordination officer for managing such complex joint operations. The exercises have been exceptionally well designed, Hayes commented. The scenarios require the kind of adaptation and integration that can only come from understanding how different units actually operate under pressure. Park nodded in agreement, adding her own assessment of the training value they had experienced. The medical coordination requirements have been particularly realistic. Someone with theoretical knowledge wouldn't have understood the timing and resource constraints that make combat medicine so challenging. Morrison's expression suggested that he shared the curiosity about background experience that had prompted Rodriguez's inquiry. As officers accustomed to evaluating qualifications and assigning responsibilities, all three commanders had noted the apparent discrepancy between the coordination officer's visible rank and her demonstrated expertise. Sarah recognized that the moment had arrived when maintaining unnecessary mystery about her qualifications would be counterproductive to the respect and cooperation that made Iron Thunder successful. The senior personnel from all participating units had earned the right to understand the experience that had prepared her for coordinating their training. Since you've all asked directly or indirectly, Sarah began, moving away from the tactical displays to face the group gathered in the command center, perhaps it's time for a more complete introduction. The change in her tone and bearing was subtle but unmistakable, reflecting a shift from coordinating officer to command authority that all present recognized as significant. Rodriguez felt his attention focused completely on what she was about to reveal, sensing that his curiosity about her background was about to be satisfied in ways he hadn't anticipated. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, she continued, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command responsibilities at the highest levels. "I currently serve as Deputy Commander of Joint Special Operations Command, with operational responsibility for coordinating special operations units across all service branches." The silence that followed her introduction was profound, as the implications of her actual rank and position registered with everyone present. Rodriguez felt his understanding of the previous week undergo fundamental revision as he realized that the apparently low-ranking coordination officer was actually one of the most senior special operations officers in the military. Morrison was the first to recover from the surprise, his expression shifting to the kind of professional respect appropriate when addressing a superior officer with extensive command authority. "Ma'am, I apologize for any lack of proper military courtesy during the past week." "No apology necessary, Colonel Morrison," Sarah replied with a slight smile. The informal approach was deliberate. Iron Thunder was designed to test integration capabilities without the complications that sometimes arise when rank becomes a factor in operational coordination. Hayes and Park exchanged glances that reflected their own revision of understanding about the officer they had been interacting with as an apparent peer. The realization that they had been participating in training designed and managed by one of the most senior special operations officers in the military explained both the sophistication of the exercises and the practical expertise that had made them so effective. Rodriguez felt his curiosity transform into something approaching awe as he processed the significance of Sarah's actual position and responsibilities. The casual conversations and respectful inquiries that had marked their interactions throughout the week took on new meaning when viewed in the context of her actual authority and experience. The decision to maintain a low profile was based on experience with joint training, where rank consciousness sometimes interferes with honest evaluation and feedback, Sarah continued, addressing the group's obvious questions about her approach. Iron Thunder was designed to test your capabilities and mine, and that required an environment where everyone could focus on operational effectiveness rather than military protocol. The explanation made perfect sense in retrospect, but Rodriguez was still processing the implications of having spent a week evaluating the performance of an officer whose qualifications far exceeded his initial assumptions. His earlier thoughts about the coordination officer's expertise had been more accurate than he realized, but his assessment of her rank and authority had been completely wrong. "Your performance throughout Iron Thunder has exceeded my expectations," Sarah continued, shifting back to her assessment of the training results. "The integration achieved by all participating units represents exactly the kind of capability that Joint Special Operations Command needs to develop for future operations." Morrison straightened to proper military attention, recognizing that they were now receiving official assessment from a superior officer whose evaluation would carry significant weight in their permanent records. "Ma'am, speaking for all participants, Iron Thunder has provided training value that exceeds anything we've previously experienced with joint operations." Hayes and Park nodded their agreement, both recognizing that their enthusiastic participation in what they had thought was experimental training had actually been observed and evaluated by one of the most senior special operations officers in the military. Their performance during Iron Thunder would become part of their official records and could influence future assignment opportunities. Rodriguez remained standing at attention, his mind racing as he processed the complete transformation of his understanding of the week's events. The respectful curiosity he had felt about the coordination officer's background had been replaced by recognition that he had been interacting with one of the most qualified special operations officers in the military without realizing her actual position. "At ease, everyone," Sarah said with a smile that acknowledged the formal shift in their interaction while indicating that she appreciated the respectful manner in which they had treated her throughout the week. "Your willingness to focus on operational effectiveness rather than rank protocol contributed significantly to Iron Thunder's success." The informal atmosphere gradually returned as everyone adjusted to the new understanding of Sarah's actual qualifications and authority. Rodriguez found himself reflecting on the week's events from a completely different perspective, recognizing that his evolving respect for the coordination officer had been more appropriate than he realized at the time. "Tomorrow's Phase 3 exercise will be the final test of the integration you've achieved," Sarah announced, returning to her immediate responsibilities while acknowledging the changed dynamic in the room. "Cross-attachment assignments will be posted tonight, and The scenario will test whether the cooperation you've developed can survive the ultimate challenge of operating as truly integrated teams rather than separate units working together. As the group prepared to leave the command center and return to their final preparations, Rodriguez lingered for a moment to address Sarah directly. The respect he had felt for her coordination abilities throughout the week had been transformed into recognition of authority and expertise that exceeded his initial expectations. "Ma'am, thank you for the opportunity to participate in Iron Thunder," Rodriguez said, his tone reflecting genuine appreciation for training that had challenged his preconceptions and expanded his understanding of joint operations. "This has been an honor that I didn't fully appreciate until tonight." Sarah's response carried the warmth of recognition for someone who had contributed significantly to the week's success, while demonstrating the kind of professional growth that made elite military training worthwhile. "The honor has been mine, Petty Officer Rodriguez. Your willingness to adapt and your commitment to mission success have been exemplary throughout Iron Thunder." As Rodriguez left the command center and returned to his team area, he reflected on the profound lesson in assumptions and recognition that the week had provided. His initial skepticism about joint training and curiosity about the coordination officer had evolved into genuine respect for capabilities he had initially underestimated, culminating in the discovery that his growing appreciation for her expertise had been more accurate than his assessment of her rank. The final phase of Iron Thunder would test whether the integration achieved through 4 days of challenging training could survive the ultimate test of mixed unit operations. But Rodriguez now understood that the exercise had been designed and managed by someone whose qualifications and experience made success not just possible, but probable. The lesson about assumptions, respect, and the unexpected places where true authority could be found would remain with him long after Iron Thunder concluded and would influence how he approached professional relationships throughout the rest of his military career.